Sword Art Online, Progressive, 008, Rhapsody of a Crimson Heat, Part 2. Written by Reki Kawahara. Illustrations by Abec. Design by BP. Translated by Stephen Paul. Read by Mae Zurita. 7th floor of Einkrad, January 2023. 14. She knew from a book in the real world that the word spa, as used in Japan to refer to an all-in-one bathing and beauty complex, came from the name of an actual hot spring area in Belgium. So when Nanur, the overseer of the Volupta Grand Casino, suggested that they go to the spa, she was briefly taken aback, but then she adjusted her perception. These people were residents of an unfamiliar world, and yet they spoke Japanese. It was simply a part of the convenience of the game. It was all a VR MMORPG being run in a virtual reality, and the people in it were merely NPCs being operated by the program itself, she supposed. "I'll scrub your back for you, Asuna," said Kismel, the dark elf washing her hair directly to Asuna's left. Asuna was startled, but came to her senses with a smile. "Really? Well, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Kismel grabbed a thin sponge that looked to have been fashioned out of some kind of plant, poured some bottled liquid onto it, and frothed it up, then moved her wooden stool to sit behind Asuna. Kismel began to rub the sponge on Asuna's back. It was just the right amount of pressure. Not too strong, not too weak. She didn't think anyone had done this since the early days of elementary school, when her family actually bathed together. Kismel wasn't just some program. She was something very different from artificial intelligence as Asuna understood it in the real world. At this point in time, Asuna viewed Kismel, and many of the other NPCs she'd met, as real people who lived in a real world called Einkrad. She was certain that her temporary partner, Kirito, shared that view. As Kismel went to work, the principal representative of other NPCs, Nanir, watched the activity to their right. "That looks very pleasant. Will you do that to my back too, Kismel?" "Gladly. Just give me a moment," Kismel finished, scrubbing Asuna's back, then used the basin full of hot water to carefully wash off the suds. "Thank you, Kismel." "You're welcome," she said, smiling at Asuna, then moved the seat over to her right. Nanir was seated on another wooden stool. She had her luxurious golden hair parted in two, hanging in the front over her shoulders. Kismel sponged it very gently. Asuna smiled to herself as the girl closed her eyes in bliss. Then she looked around the rest of the bathing area. The bath in the luxury hotel on the 3rd floor of Volupta Grand Casino was certainly deluxe enough to be called a spa. Upon passing through the door in the hallway, they entered a lounge with reclining chairs, then a pristine changing room, followed by the bath at last. It was reminiscent of a real resort hotel, hot spring grand bath, a local public bathhouse, or a neighborhood health spa, and yet also unlike those things. For one thing, there were no windows. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and if there had been a big window pointing south, they'd be able to bring in all kinds of sunlight. But the only light came from the lantern on the wall. The natural black rock interior made the bath very dim, if not as dim as Nanir's room. On the other hand, there was a great variety of plants around the place that made it feel like a greenhouse, and not so cramped and stuffy. Half of the bathing room, which was a good 30 feet to a side in total, was dedicated to a washing area, built in direct facsimile of the Japanese style. Pipes pumped in fresh water at all times, while wooden bath stools sat in front of the shelves with sponges, shampoo, and body soap. As a matter of fact, you could say that this entire facility was Japanese style. There weren't many group baths like this in America or Europe. In a sense, given that Einkrad was based on classical fantasy themed after medieval Europe, this place might be inappropriate for the setting. But to Asuna, any realism-based design philosophy that would eliminate a spacious, luxurious bath was worth less than the blood-sucking slugs in Looser Rock Forest. Between the tented bath in the Dark Elf camp on the 3rd floor, Yofel Castle on the 4th floor, the village bath in Shiaya on the 5th floor, and the underground bath in Castle Galley on the 6th, Asuna had received an immeasurable amount of refreshment and vitality. Even the bath in the room above the farmhouse that Kirito was renting on the 1st floor, if she hadn't been able to bathe to her heart's content that day, Asuna might have lost her will to fight against this game of death forever. She recalled that the bath was where she had first met Argo, the info dealer. When the girl strode right into the bath, Asuna had screamed her lungs out, but now Argo was a friend she could confide in without reservation. Speaking of Argo, she had quickly washed her hair and body and was now monopolizing the spacious bath. When Asuna spotted her in the state of utter relaxation with her limbs splayed out wide, she couldn't wait any longer. "I'm going into the bath," Asuna told Kismel. "Yes, I will join you soon." Asuna stood up and crossed the stone floor to the bath. She used her bucket to rinse off first, then slid into the crystal clear water. She couldn't stop the sound from escaping her throat. The numbing, throbbing sensation extended to the tips of her fingers and toes, and she sank down to her mouth and closed her eyes. SAO's VR system had trouble recreating the sensation of liquid, Kirito had said once. It was true that when she bathed on the 1st floor, something felt off about the way the water pressured against her bare skin. The sense of overall pressure, the reflection of light on the water surface, and the way individual droplets worked. But the more opportunities she found to bathe, the less she minded these things. Either she was getting used to VR bathing, or the system itself was evolving. If Kirito were here, she could ask him his thoughts, and then she had to scold herself. No, he's not supposed to be in here. As though reading her mind, Argo lazily murmured, "Gosh, if only Keyboy could be here too." Asuna very nearly swallowed some water. She had to lift her mouth back above the bath. "Why would you say something like that? There's no men's bath here." "Just give him a blindfold. He'll be fine." "That would be kind of mean," Asuna chuckled. But then she realized something. "Wait, Argo, was there a sign that this was a women's only bath?" "Nope." She glanced back at the entrance. That meant that this was a mixed bath, and a male NPC, or worse, player, could walk through at any moment. "You're safe," said a voice from behind her, once again reading Asuna's thoughts. She spun around and saw Nanir, her face and body washed, standing with her hands on her hips. "The hotel's guests can only use the bath between 3 and 9 o'clock. It's all hours at the moment. That means we can even do this." She crouched briefly, then sprang high into the air, did a pike flip, and landed bottom first into the bath. Despite her tiny size, the sheer momentum of her maneuver splashed water in everywhere. It rained down over Asuna and Argo's head. They sat there, unmoving, as water dripped from their bangs. Kismel, meanwhile, silently slipped into the water and said, "If Miss Kyo were here, she would have scolded you." She certainly would have, admitted Ninir as she floated up to the surface. Almost every bath I take is accompanied by Kyo, so on the few occasions this is not the case. I get to do things I'm not normally allowed to do. Why don't you try jumping in too? I'll pass, Asuna said, doing her best to smile. On the inside, she was thinking, there's no way this girl is just a program. She slicked back her wet hair, then relaxed once again. The bath was a bit on the hot side, but the good thing was that you couldn't get lightheaded or dehydrated in the virtual world. Even better, her waist-length hair didn't need to be tied up before it hit the water. There was no loose hair floating in the water or clinging to her skin. If I get used to the conveniences of this world, I'm going to have a hard time when I get back to reality, she chuckled to herself, until her smile turned bitter. She was acting like they'd come so far since the first floor, but they were only on the 7th. There were 93 unconquered floors of Aincrad above their heads. Even if they took a week to complete each one, that would take nearly 2 years. And that was an optimistic view. The difficulty was only likely to rise as they went upward. Strangely, however, thinking about the future didn't fill her with the same sense of despair as before. She had to banish the idea that she might be getting used to this wild scenario. A virtual game world that would kill her if the HP dropped to 0, even once. Maybe she was getting a tiny bit used to it, but that wasn't all. Most likely, there was something building up within her that was neutralizing that despair. The beauty of the scenery, the taste of the food, the pleasure of the bath, the satisfaction of solving riddles, the socialization with Argo and Kismel, and her ever-present black-haired temporary partner. It was a little galling to admit it, but for every time he angered her or annoyed her or surprised her or delighted her, some tiny bit of the built-up silt of fear and panic at the bottom of her core blew away. If she kept going on adventures with him, would all that darkness within her eventually disappear? Would she feel like there was a meaning one day, a benefit to having been trapped in this place? She couldn't be sure yet. Maybe some massive, unseen misery was going to beat her down, leaving her unable to get back up again. But even still... On her right, Kismel's eyes were closed. On her left, Argo was watching with a smile on her face. Across from her, Ninir floated on the water, limbs outstretched. Asuna decided that if she had the chance later tonight, she'd invite Kismel in the bath again.